At this juncture, I would like now to invite my co-host, the next moderator, Dr. Eric Ogello, who is a lecturer at the University, Maseno University. Eric is a PhD. He has a PhD from Nagasaki University, and he is also a student of Ghent University. He was originally in the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. So he'll take over for the next session of the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Betty and Patrick. I want to sincerely thank all the participants for the very, very great presentations, really, really informative. We have entered into the session of Q&A, and I want to invite everyone to participate in this session. We have received some questions under the Q&A box. I have consolidated those questions and merged them so that we don't spend more time. We have saved some minutes, so I think we can have 20 minutes for this session. So I want to first start by the question of Charles Opanga. Charles Opanga did not address the question to anyone, but I want to address it to Dr. Raphael from Mozambique. Charles is asking the applicability of Artemia use for small-scale farmers who are practicing extensive farming in rural areas. In your experience from Mozambique, Dr. Raphael, can you respond to this question from Charles Opanga?
Yes, thank you. We were fortunate in our project, as I referred to, when we started developing aquaculture, Artemia culture. We were hit by white spot disease in shrimp farming. That was our market. So we lost the market. We could not have buyer. So we can't talk about small scale farmers supplying them with Artemia, either cyst or biomass. That's why we closed the project. So we do not have experience about supplying Artemia to small scale farmers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daktari. I hope, Charles, you've got your answer right there. A very interesting question from Alessandro. Alessandro, you are addressing this question to Nascens, and you're asking that during the inoculation of Artemia, probably 4 decades ago, were there some local strains of Artemia at the Kenyan coast? Did you do some preliminary studies to identify if there were some Artemia strains? Nascens?
During the survey along the Kenya coast that preceded the inoculation, we did not find any trace of Artemia along the Kenya coast. But then we decided for the inoculation and decided for the San Francisco Bay Artemia. This was in close cooperation with the scientific coordination of the project. We thought that if there was no Artemia in Kenya, along the Kenya coast, any Artemia in the world is actually exotic for Kenya. And therefore it was decided to use the San Francisco Bay strain, the one that has been proven very successful in previous inoculation trials in Southeast Asia, in Brazil, and so on. Moreover, this Artemia is an Artemia strain with a very high value in aquaculture because it is a very small sized Artemia, which can then be used for a very early feeding of fish and shrimp. That was the reason why this one was chosen.
Thank you so much, Nascens, for that beautiful reply. And now let me ask the question from Moses. Moses Muga is asking, how do you produce Artemia capsules? I want to invite Professor Patrick Soglos. I know you have enormous experience with the Artemia value chain for human food in Asia. Could you kindly share with us how they are making Artemia capsules, Artemia omelette, and perhaps other forms of products for human consumption?
Yeah, well, it's not under the form of capsules, it's the Artemia biomass as such that is being used. And in recent years, we see a lot of increasing interest, not only the Artemia omelette. I can make the paper available where the recipe is being given, but recently also in Bangladesh, they are making Artemia kebab. But let me repeat what Gilbert has been mentioning in his talk. This is nothing new. Mark Twain and Charles Monod were the historians that were mentioning, I think one paper was in the 60s and Mark Twain was even several decades before, referring to the use of Artemia biomass from Lake Texcoco in Mexico by the Aztecs. Pan d'Artemia, Artemia bread, if we translate it from the word that was used in Libya by a particular tribe. I forgot the name, maybe Gilbert had mentioned it. So this is something that is gaining interest and should gain interest, because we talk about sustainable food production, low in the food chain. I think with Artemia, 60% animal protein, very high digestibility, probably also rich in minerals. This is something that I think FAO also wants to recommend for future developments.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. That's quite exhaustive. And now I want to ask on behalf of Alexandro again. Alexandro is asking Maureen. Maureen, please listen to this. Has Kenya explored the use of Artemia as human food? And what's the current market outlet for locally produced seeds? Maureen?
Thank you so much, Alessandro, for that question. What I would say is that Kenya so far has not explored the use of Artemia as human food. We are just using it for aquaculture. And about the market outlets, we have been able to sell Artemia seeds to aqua shops, the local aqua shops. And then also the salt farmers also request for Artemia from us and students from the universities. And we also look forward to the marine hatchery that is coming up in Kenya. I believe we will also have, we will also supply to the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. That's a short and clear response. George Deritu is asking, and I want to address this to Gilbert, do the different variants or genotypes of Artemia have same growth parameters? I know, Gilbert, you have done a lot of lab works as well, reproductive studies of Artemia. Could you please help George to understand?
So there is ample literature reference that different strains of Artemia may have different characteristics. This is not only growth characteristics, but also, which is important if you want to produce it, also fecundity, because growth is one aspect, but survival, fecundity, so how fast and how abundantly does the population reproduce, that's also an important aspect. You could also say resistance to environmental stresses, and then generally to let's say summarize it a little bit, it's often a combination of genetic characteristics, so characteristics that are inherent to the strain as such, and also environmental conditions, because even for a specific strain, its performance will vary depending on the environmental conditions. And then, well, for instance, Eddie Nasser just mentioned it in a previous answer. This is one of the reasons why for inoculation, people often opted and still opt for inoculation of a San Francisco Bay type Artemia, because this has proven to be more productive, more performant in a wider array of environmental conditions.
Thank you so much, Gilbert, for your response. And now I want to highlight the question from Frida. Frida Muni, you have asked a very nice question here, and this concerns blue economy. And I want to invite our very own Dr. Betty to respond to this. Frida is asking the possibility of commercialization of Artemia production in Kenya, now that it's a very, very important blue resource in our coastal areas. Betty?
Now, as was mentioned in both Professor Rasso's presentation and Maureen's presentation, we have a huge potential. Kenya has a huge potential because the salt belt offers a lot of space. And I think the policy players really have the intention to develop aquaculture, especially mariculture. And mariculture cannot develop without the presence or the having Artemia as a, you know, as the essential ingredient. What we need to do, as mentioned in the presentations, is really to facilitate, particularly the smallholder salt works, because the big salt works are not really interested in doing Artemia as a commercial entity. So probably what could be done at the policy level is to solve the land tenure issue. How do we allocate land for the small people, for the small scale salt farmers, who can then do the actual production, the integrated production of salt and Artemia? Because I think for targeting the big salt farmers is rather a long shot. So for me, I see it in getting the policymakers to sort out this land tenure issue, because there is a lot of government land, I think, that can be allocated to smallholder farmers. And the smallholder farmers are really many along the salt belt. All they need is to be allocated land, get organized, and the production can happen. So for me, I see it as, you know, starting from the land tenure system at the coast, which is a big historical problem which Kenya needs to solve to get this Artemia thing going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daktari. And your response also covers the concern of Ronald. I think Ronald heard from Maureen about the challenges of land at the Kenyan coast, especially for the smallholder farmers. So I think, Ronald, the response from Dr. Betty adequately captures your concerns. And now I want to ask Kapinga about the economic value of Artemia farming in Tanzania. This question is coming from Mabel. Mabel wants to know, first, what's the viability of production of Artemia in the offshores of Tanzanian coast, for example, and what is the economic value of the same? Kapinga, please.
Thank you, moderator, Dr. Eric. Yeah, I've also presented in my presentation that the economic viability is there because the demand for Artemia is there. And my last slides show that importing Artemia from Asia or wherever, or other countries, is very expensive, up to $100 US, and a number of hatchery owners have stopped using Artemia. So because of the cost. So if we can produce from our country, then at least it will be a relief to the hatchery owners. And the other thing, the value, another economic value, I think, for the salt, to improve the quality of salt. So I think, and one of our collaborators has seen the importance of Artemia because he once visited at Consult, Kenya, and you see now the quality of salt itself is better. So the viability, because the potential, as I've introduced in my slides, the area, the coastline, the salt pans, but awareness is not there, and technical experience and the demand is there. So we really need to push this Artemia farming in Tanzania. I don't know if I've answered the question. Thank you, Dr. Eric.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kapiga, for your response. Let me capture the views of Nazel Madala. Madala is giving a general conversation to all presenters, and I think to all fans in this, saying that we need to undertake a scoping study to better understand issues and the bottleneck for Artemia culture in different African countries in order to develop a robust Artemia value chain. Thank you so much, Madala, for capturing that. Indeed, this is the time for a conversation for Artemia production in Africa and in other countries to enhance aquaculture production for food security and for increased livelihoods. Messians is asking Professor Mohammed. Messians wants to hear, are there some potential challenges in the Artemia production in Tunisia? Professor.
Yes, as I said, there is a good opportunity since we have at least 5 potential sites where Artemia are give some good, let's say, opportunity according to the biological and the biochemical analysis done. But the lack is everybody look for an industrial or a big project to develop or to enhance Artemia cyst production, and nobody look for small collecting or small project, or at least to start with small activity and fund who take this product. In the other hand, all the aquaculture farm make a choice for the simple way to protect fish. So they prefer buying fingerlings from Europe at 0.3 or 0.4 fingerlings and avoid all the difficulty of hatchery. And so actually all is blocked at this level. Only 2 old hatcheries and all the new fish farm try to avoid the difficulty of hatchery activity, hatchery problems linked especially with Artemia or other specificity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. I have captured a question from Dr. John Kipiegon. Very interesting question. I would wish that Professor Asso respond to this. Professor, if you are listening, Dr. John is asking that was there an EIA study done before the introduction of Artemia in the Kenyan soil? I think Dr. Kipiegon is trying to understand. Of course, we know the history of introduction of species in Kenya, especially Lake Victoria, has some devastating effects. So John wants to know, was there EIA done before the inoculation? And what are the impacts of this introduction to the native biodiversity? Professor.
Thank you very much. That's a good question. The correct answer is that impact assessment was not done. And this was not by mistake. It's simply because Artemia, by nature of its biology, actually is self-controlled. It can only survive in a salty environment. So we didn't think it was a major issue at that. And again, we are talking about a salt environment where most other animals cannot survive. So it's only Artemia that survives. So its impact on other species really does not. It's neither here nor there. Maybe I should add to what Dr. Nyonje had talked about, Betty, is that maybe with hindsight, we find that we concentrated on the big salt farms. We have 7 major players, salt farmers. And I think that is why we never went very far, because the interest of the salt farmers was just production of salt. And they were getting more money from that. if only we had done a socioeconomic survey and just involved the small players at that time, I think the story would be the same like in Vietnam, because it's very challenging. We are now growing old, but Artemia is where we started it. It's very sad. So what the new policy direction is to make sure that the local salt players, the small scale players are involved. And of course, you've known the Kenya policy direction is to make sure that the blue economy is at the center of everything. So a lot of money is being pumped by the Kenya government to make sure that mariculture develops. So the issue of land tenure is going to be tackled because land issues have been devolved. We have now the county governments. So I think within the next 5 years, we are able to, we are going to see a big difference, because with this development of the state-of-the-art aquaculture station in the coast, targeting mariculture, definitely the only way out is to make sure that Artemia propagation, Artemia culture continues. And we are still there with the help of God. We'll be able to see it through. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. That's a very nice response. I think maybe the last question from the Q&A, then we open the floor for any other reactions. This is Moses, you are asking the lifespan of Artemia. And I want to invite Martin Serwada. Could you kindly respond to this based on your laboratory works that you're already doing? Could you comment on this, please?
Thank you, Eric. And I want to thank all the participants and the organizers once again for this webinar. I would say the lifespan of Artemia, it really depends on what conditions one is working at. But what I saw, we first got our riding couples at the age of 15 days. But in the subsequent experiments, we had riding couples at 21 days, sometimes and in one experiment, we had it at 23 days. So it really involves around what salinity you are working at, because higher salinities will affect the energy that is invested in terms of growth, and it will affect the duration and when you get your first offsprings. But it can generally complete its life cycle within 2 weeks.
Thank you so much, Martin. There's another comment from Madala. Just seeing it here now. Madala, you are giving a general comment to the participants. The Mozambican experience reaffirms a need for comprehensive understanding of the value chain dynamics before going full through, promoting Artemia culture without having solid markets. Thank you so much, Madala, for your response. I can see some more comments are coming. Alex Kimathi is asking, how does a farmer of Artemia in saltwater determine the biomass to be harvested to leave sufficient biomass to produce and carry its role in cleaning the salt during the following farming cycle? I don't know if Maureen, can you be able to respond to that? Alex wants to know, how does a farmer determine the biomass to harvest without over-harvesting?
I would say the harvesting biomass is could be based on the demand. Maybe what really the farmer wants to harvest, but because Artemia has it reproduces after every 15 days. Artemia reproduces, so you have several generations in there. So when you're harvesting Artemia, you also need if you want to leave some Artemia in the pond, you have to use a mesh size of a higher mesh size, so that you ensure that you also leave the young ones in the pond, and then they can continue with the generations and continue reproducing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Elias Muhumuza, you are asking Serwada. Serwada, from your findings, do all saltwater lakes in Uganda have potential to produce Artemia in bulk or in big numbers? Martin, please.
Okay. Thank you, Elias Muhumuza. From our studies, the first, I think the largest potential is with Lake Bunyampaka, because with Bunyampaka, we managed to grow Artemia until reproductive stage or age. With Lake Katwe, which is the largest saline lake in the country, we couldn't, by that time, we couldn't manage to sustain the live Artemia after 3 days. All our cultures got mortality. So I would still go with Lake Bunyampaka first and then work around with Lake Katwe water and see how we can modify it to produce Artemia. The other lakes are not yet researched about their viability for Artemia culture, but that's one thing that we need to look at as a country in order to utilize this natural resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much for that response. I can see questions are coming thick and fast. I think we will be able to share the presentations just to clarify on some of these questions coming here. But let me capture this from Alexander Fulanda, who wants to know whether Artemia can be cultured in fresh water. Fulanda, Artemia is a marine species. But can I invite Professor Suglus, please? Will you respond to Fulanda whether Artemia can be cultured in fresh water and what's the status of this worldwide?
Well, Artemia, brine shrimp Artemia, the genus Artemia cannot be grown in freshwater, but there are several freshwater brachiopods like Streptocephalus, Chirocephalus, a number of others, Branchipus, that can be that belong also to the Anostraca and that can be grown in freshwater. And in India and a number of other countries, there are some reports on the production and the use of freshwater brine shrimp. Well, not brine shrimp, freshwater fairy shrimp, sorry. There are some advantages, but there are also some disadvantages. The advantages are that they grow bigger as compared to what we know today in the biggest Artemia parthenogenetica. The big handicap, however, is that they do not reproduce by the two modes, ovoviviparity and oviparity. This is indeed a handicap because with Artemia you can start with a small inoculum coming from cysts, and if you can manage to have the live reproduction, you build a big population that then eventually can switch to cyst production. So that's a big difference between the freshwater anostracans and Artemia. And then the other one is that the cysts of the freshwater anostracans sink, whereas the cysts of Artemia float. And that means if you are in front of a big pond or a big lake where the conditions might be favorable for fairy shrimp, you have to harvest the cysts from the sediments, which of course makes it much more difficult than in the case of Artemia, where they float and by wind they are thrown ashore.
Thank you so much, Professor Suglus. The last question is from David Midumbi, wants to know about how do we break Artemia dormancy? He has addressed this to, again, Professor Patrick.
And I pass it on to Gilbert because he did a lot of work on that subject.
Gilbert, please.
Yeah, okay, well, we have been talking already about different populations of Artemia, what we call strains. Well, let's say, depending on the strain, the way how the dormancy, we prefer to use the word diapause, okay? So depending on the strain, the way how the diapause is broken may be different. But let's say, summarizing, for many strains, it always involves, to a certain extent, a dehydration of the embryo. Dehydration, this just means removing water. It's not necessarily drying It could be just exposure to high salinity environments. And then depending on the strain, sometimes an additional stimulus treatment is necessary. And this is then a cold treatment. So exposing the cyst to low temperatures, if this should be fridge or freezing and how long, etc. Again, this may be different depending on the strain and also sometimes depending on the actual batch of cysts. But summarizing, it comes down to that.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. Now we have 1 or 2 minutes for a general question coming from anybody in the panel. I can see Professor Rasowo, your hand is up. Please just unmute yourself and take it over.
Thank you. I'm just curious. The presentation from South Africa referred to Artemia franciscana as invasive. Maybe can somebody demystify that for me?
Well, if I can try to answer here, I think Horst Kaiser has mentioned in his presentation that in many countries in the world, when they were setting up companies, and that can be European companies, but we have very good evidence for American companies, that when they set up a new salt operation, that they seed the salt operation with salt from a salt work that is very successful in its production. And that practice existed maybe already more than 50, maybe more than 100 years. And I can give a very concrete example, which is from before our times. I would say this was noticed in 1971 or 72. I can look it up. That in North Queensland, Rockhampton is a particular big salt company that was operated, that was set up by the Morton Salt Company from California in the US. And they were seeding the salt ponds with salt from the San Francisco Bay operation. And probably no coincidence that exactly there, Artemia franciscana, I know that this was confirmed in a number of studies. I don't know if ever, maybe Gilbert can add here, I don't know if ever more detailed DNA profiling or whatever other RFLP techniques were applied to see if it is Great Salt Lake or Franciscana. But this was confirmed by that particular American company that when they were setting up hundreds of years ago, even salt operations, that they were seeding them with salt. And of course, seeding them with salt means that there can be some Artemia cysts, and that's a way to introduce. Gilbert, you have anything to add?
No, I'm just trying to remember, but there's no particular information that I know of, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Professor Souglous, for that vivid response. Professor Rasowo, I hope you are satisfied with the response. I want to also invite another comment, question, crisscrossing, before I return the microphone to my mentor and my friend, Betty, as we wind up this Q&A session. Professor Souglous, I can see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I don't find the site where I can raise my hand. I have a question for Mohamed Romdan. I'm very interested in what he was explaining about using the brine from the desalination plants. You were mentioning, okay, this is an ecological problem indeed. Does it mean that they are using the effluent not only to produce Artemia, but also to produce salt?
No, no. The aim of this pond is only to absorb, to evaporate the water between cycle of desalination. but over years, these ponds are full, and the Artemia cysts start to be developed. And the company of water looking now for solution, especially to export, to take out something from this pond. Since it is not possible to take out the whole water, they think to add ponds, or maybe to try to exploit to produce salt. But this may be not at the commercial level, is not suitable in Tunisia, because we have no problem to producing salt in the coastal salt work and salina. And now they're looking how to resolve this problem. It is a problem for these companies, and they try to introduce any activity linked with these ponds.
Yeah, very interesting. And I know, and maybe Gilbert has more details, similar considerations are made in Egypt, where also desalination plants are looking into the possibility to link up with Artemia production. Gilbert, you have more. I know that there is a student who will come soon to work with you.
Yeah, that's true, but the timing is not entirely fixed. But I was not aware that he is in this type of work.
Well, it's the effluent of a desalination plant.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Souglous and Gilbert, for your response. At this time, we are running out of time for Q&A. Allow me to revert the microphone virtually back to Dr. Betty to continue the program. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you so much, my co-moderator, for so ably taking us through the Q&A section. And I think that was really, really a lively session.